So my name is Emily Bryant, and I'm currently an analyst at Brown Flynn. We're a sustainability consulting firm in Northeast Ohio, and we primarily do GRI reporting for companies. We also do strategy and materiality as well to help them with their sustainability programs. I double majored in sustainability and studio art at Baldwin-Wallace University and graduated in 2010. And then have continued work in sustainability, listed some of my previous positions. Did some product design and writing, and have worked in the parks, which I'll go into in more detail. So prior to graduating my last semester, I have a window coming up here. I did an independent study in sustainable art, and I basically wanted to explore sustainable materials, subject matter, and being able to use sustainable art for education. So with that in mind, I looked at natural object sculpture, upcycled jewelry, trash sculpture, sustainable photography, and invasive species collages. So pictured on this slide is one of my native species blended images. So this series is made up of, 2 to 15 separate images that are blended together in Photoshop. And then I actually did find a company that prints on bamboo paper that's sustainable and archival quality. And it definitely took some time looking around at sustainable materials, what works and what doesn't. There were a couple companies where the photography came out really pixelated, that was using more natural inks. And so really trying to find, what would work best for the art and still be quality as well. So this was some of the natural sculpture I played with. So these were all found plant parts in the Cleveland Metro Parks, and built a squirrel out of. I used a sustainable super glue that was supposed to be low VOC. It worked pretty well, but it wasn't quite, what I was looking for in terms of the glue, so I kept on exploring some other different projects as well. Left here is one of the upcycled jewelry pieces that I made that was presented to Susan Solomon when she came to Baldwin-Wallace University. And so again, this is one of the blended photo collages, and then some scrap metal that was in the jewelry shop. And then also pictured is P.R. Miller, known as the Grizzled Wizard, who's a really great sustainable artist that lives out in Akron, and he builds giant sculpture from waste products. And so he, builds mostly giant flowers and insects. He's presented his work at Stan Hewitt, and I actually got to spend a day with him and make some art, although he was using some pretty toxic foam glues and different materials that I still wasn't, quite thrilled with. So it was really interesting to see what he was doing, but really, trying to get more towards sustainable materials. Kept on exploring. So here's some more of the native species photography. These are usually shown together with the invasive species collages, which I'll be showing momentarily. And a lot of, the goal of this work was really, I was doing an invertebrate natural history course at the time, and really just being amazed at, what's around me, what's local, and all the insects that you don't see on a daily basis, and really looking around, and it really just retrained the way that I thought and the way that I looked at the world, looking for these insects, which also ended up playing into the invasive species art, but really trying to encourage people to see, here's what's around you, here's what's at stake if it's not taken care of. So while I was doing this independent study, I was lucky enough to be interning at the Cleveland Metro Parks at the same time, and I was brought on to really tell the natural resources story. So at the time, the team didn't really have much of a website put together. They were talking about their research a little bit, but didn't really have a lot of accompanying photography. So part of what I did was that I would go out with the different research teams and take photos of their work and share what they were doing on the website, and kind of just be a journalist and really, communicate what these teams were working on. So I went out with the invasive plant strike team and was just amazed at all the plants I thought were native and the metro parks that were not. And then really seeing, wow, a lot of these plants are being sprayed with herbicide. a lot of times we're collecting them and putting them in bags, which are then landfilled or burned. And, started asking questions, well, can these things be composted? And really just got to the point that there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know, for all the different species, if we burn them, at what temperature are the seeds no longer viable. We don't want to risk spreading any invasives further. And then, also at the same time, really hearing the story of the emerald ash borer for the first time and seeing firsthand the damage to the ash trees in Ohio. You're going out on a spring day and just seeing huge, swaths of forest just with no leaves on them, that had all been destroyed, and seeing where the trees had fallen, invasive plants coming up and replacing them, and learning that we can lose 1/10 of our trees in Ohio, and, we're losing the battle. It's emerald ash borers in all of our counties now. We're collecting seed to replant at a later date. So, it was just a really powerful story that I didn't feel was being told, and so I wondered, well, here's a material that's typically not being used for anything. Can I use it, and can I tell a story with it? So art and sustainability, that's an odd combination. Along with communicating, part of what motivated me about the invasive species story is that, I think we need to share scientific concepts more with the public and more engaging and innovative ways. When it comes to the sciences, there's been a lot of damage to reputation, I feel like. In the past, people were much more receptive to what scientists were saying, but, climate change being turned into a political issue, we have corporations that, can bring scientists on board to speak on behalf of the corporation and not necessarily always an objective viewpoint. When it comes to product safety and different things like that, and even with some weapon technologies and pesticides and everything, I think the public started seeing trade-offs. Lead paint, yeah, the paint works great, but it's toxic. With dietary needs, a lot of those, eggs are good, eggs are bad. And I'm seeing it in my age group a lot. I remember being shown An Inconvenient Truth in one of my classes and getting feedback from students at the end, and someone said, I don't believe any of it because Al Gore said it. So really just, thinking again, how can I communicate in an objective way? How can I get these ideas in front of people? And then, a lot of people just aren't getting outside as much as they used to. I grew up with Bill Nye and a bunch of other science shows, but really when you're an adult, I think, besides some of the Discovery Channel and some of those shows, you're not really getting to see a lot of the local issues and getting connected to them. So again, here's more about the herbicides, but really thinking about, how else could these plants be used. And really, I think the public doesn't understand what's at stake and what the options are. I have seen people, go on the Metro Parks Facebook or some other park websites and say, how dare you use herbicides? I bring my kids here. I bring my dogs here. And I think, most of them just assume that weeds are being sprayed. I think they don't really understand the full magnitude of the invasive species and the spread going on there. And then, some of the alternatives, bringing invasive predators over for invasive species to try to take care of them that way, but then, you could end up with, species want to survive and they adapt. Are they going to stop eating, the prey when they run out? Or are they going to go after something else? We've looked at hybridizing with the ash trees to help combat emerald ash borer, and then looking at targeted attacks. So I included a link. There's a really interesting article in New York Times about a scientist who has identified a bacteria that attacks zebra mussels specifically, but doesn't seem to do damage to other freshwater mussels and species. So looking at the invasive collage process, I'll jump ahead in a moment here and show some images. But, you know, I collect the plants and press them. I'm investigating color preservation, so obviously I do have some limitations based on what plants I'm able to collect, what color invasive plants are, and then over time, you know, trying to keep true to keeping the art sustainable. How can I preserve color? There is going to be some natural fading over time, and really trying to understand each species and how that color change takes place. So I do use acid-free paper and a plant-based glue. I tend, if I can, I like to put the native species that are destroyed by the invasive. So emerald ash borer, you'll see, has chewed up ash leaves in the picture. So people can see, you know, not only the emerald ash borer, but what's at stake, and as well as the invasive plants used in the image. There are some sustainability challenges with framing, so recycled glass is not transparent. I also need to use UV protected glass for the artwork, so that tends to be a challenge in that it's more expensive, and there's special coatings for that glass to preserve the plants. I am looking at seeing if I can get some ash trees that have been bored through by emerald ash borer to create frames for the work. We'll see how the availability works out. And then displaying and signage. So typically I've been showing the artwork in, you know, more educational facilities in the parks, and there's a gallery called Art Science Gallery in Austin, Texas. That's actually all scientists who are artists to help share their work. Some more about the process. This is a piece in progress right now. So you can see here, this is a different piece than I would typically do since I'm using black paper. But these are salamanders, and so the upper left is the California tiger salamander, and that's the native species. And then it's currently endangered due to the barred tiger salamander. And these two are actually hybridizing and almost creating a super species that's bigger, more aggressive. And they're finding that, you know, in the ponds where these hybrids are, that they're not finding very many larval salamanders, and they're not finding frogs and other species that should be there, but they're conflicted with, you know, some of the genetic material that they need to preserve is within the hybrids. So I thought this was a really intriguing story to tell. So I have all three species displayed in this work. And I'm using lesser celandine petals for the yellow, and then we'll see trying to fit some other colors in as well, but typically start out sketching out the different species, you know, studying what they do and what they look like, and putting them together. More typically I'm doing one species per page of the invasive only on white paper, so you can see more of the process. So this is the tawny crazy ant, which is currently invasive in Austin, Texas. And these ants actually form super colonies, so if they find one colony, they'll be friendly with it. And it's a really interesting story again because these ants are out competing the fire ants that are there that were actually invasive originally, and have since naturalized, and there's been an equilibrium between the fire ants and the natives. And now the tawny is coming in and disrupting, and these ants tend to attack electrical boxes. They go in people's homes, and when one of the individuals is killed, it releases a scent that actually attracts others from the colony. So in an area where, you know, you're trying to set traps, or if they're in an area like an electrical box, they've shorted those, and they'll keep coming and piling up until they destroy the connections there. So they've done a lot of damages in homes in Austin, and they're having a difficult time trying to control them, and they're spreading quickly. I use Nandina. That's a really popular invasive in Texas, and it's also planted ornamentally in a lot of storefronts and in different areas and neighborhoods. So something else, looking at, you know, studying the photos here, and as an artist I started out doing very realistic sketches and paintings of animals and people. So really, you know, in some ways the collage work's been really liberating because, you know, I'm limited by materials and being excuse me, dimensional, but at the same time, you know, can get quite a bit of accuracy there as well. So none of the leaves are painted. These are all, you know, the Nandinas, the bright red. The China berry tree is black. I actually looked at, when I pressed some of the leaves and berries, the berries broke and dyed the leaves black. I also have some Arundo donax. That's one of the more invasive reeds in Texas. I did live in Texas for a year, so I was exploring some of the invasive species there as well. So here's a couple of the other pieces that I've done. The torpedo bug, that's another invasive in Texas, attacking a lot of fruit trees mostly. Japanese beetle, so this is a common pest in my own backyard. Grew up in Northeast Ohio, on our rose bushes a lot. So this was one that was really good that people could relate to and recognize more readily. An example here too of the beetle and also showing the rose petals at the same time. The yellow jacket I did as a gift for President Durst from Bolden Wallace University. The yellow jacket is our mascot. But interestingly enough, when I was doing more research on the species, it's now invasive in Hawaii. But this one I played around with using some native species. So the body is made out of pansies, and the wings are water hyacinth flowers. And I used autumn olive for a highlight in the eye since it's got kind of a metallic look to it. So some of the trade-offs with sustainable art, you know, historically a lot of what's toxic in artistic materials is there for permanence. So this is a lot of, you know, the spray fixatives that you use in artwork to prevent it from smudging. It's in a lot of the pigments of the paint to keep the color over time. So I put a piece here by Andy Goldsworthy. He's a nature artist, and so a lot of what he does is he goes out in nature and does arrangements, which obviously aren't going to be permanent. So a lot of his art is shared, you know, by doing print work and photography of the actual artwork. So really, you know, when I look at being an artist and either selling work or how I'm showing my work and how it lasts over time, you know, that is something that I think about and struggle with at times. And then, you know, some of the other dichotomies here, so, you know, realism versus what materials do you have available, what colors are there in plants. You know, white and black have been difficult colors for me to find occurring, and when I want to do some, you know, transparent plants for wings, I've been looking at flower petals, which have worked well, but for emerald ash borer, I was hoping to do one with its wings open, and it does have kind of black transparent wings, so, you know, kind of seeing what I can do with what I have. Quality versus sustainability, so I had mentioned before, you know, the photography that had the pigments and that looked really pixelated and did not last long and did not blow up well, and making larger prints. And then really, you know, using art in an educational capacity versus, you know, maybe showing in a gallery and knowing the audience. So the scientific community tends to understand and appreciate my artwork maybe more than the average person. And responsibility, you know, I keep that in mind a lot when I'm doing my artwork. It's very important when I'm collecting invasive species that I'm very conscious of how they're being moved, and being really careful to not be moving or spreading anything when I'm going out to collect plants. So I thought it would be interesting to share some reactions to my art since I am showing them in the public. A lot of people don't believe at first that they're all leaves. They think that I've done some painting. They're also, you know, really intrigued by how destructive a lot of the species are. So emerald ash borer, you know, a bug is doing all of that. It's just one bug. Can't we kill it? You know, they don't really they don't really understand all the biology there, but they are asking questions. And really what's very rewarding about my work is that people are getting up close, they're reading the labels, and it's starting a discussion, you know, between people that are looking at my work or with me. So, you know, a lot of what I get is there anything we can do? You know, can we save the ash trees? which has been really rewarding, and a lot of just general amusement from the scientific community that I make invasive species out of invasive species. So I just included examples of some of the labels. For me, it's really important showing this work in an educational capacity that I do talk about the species that are being presented, and that I talk about, what the species does, how it's moved, what it destroys. So people are really invested and they know locally. I own, rose bushes, or I have ash trees in my yard. I really want to hammer home that local component of it and really get them engaged. I have been fortunate enough to present some works as gifts to keynote speakers at Baldwin Wallace University. So listed a couple: David LaRue's the CEO at Forest City, former Mayor Daley, Susan Solomon. So it's great to be able to speak to different audiences that these keynote speakers are at and share the story of invasives as well while I'm there. Other ways of getting the word out, so with my artwork, I'm doing some presentations, exhibiting at Art Science Gallery. I have looked at some publications. The Emerald Ash Borer has been printed in Claremont University's STEAM journal. So they, you typically hear of STEM. They're actually starting to do some STEAM, including art as well in the sciences. As a field of value, and I think a lot of it is that communication component that is so necessary for STEM fields. And then I do have a shop on Etsy.com, so I do prints, note cards, played around designing some green bags that people could carry around and share the message with. So why science art? I'm conflicted a lot with academia. I kind of walk the line between science and art a lot, and I think with the communication piece, the public is really disengaged with a lot of the scientific work that's going on locally, nationally, globally. And, part of the problem is that the public funds a lot of research for these projects. So when they're kept in the dark and they're not knowing what's going on, it's hard for them to really be motivated to give and be engaged. And I think a lot of that is really due to the complexity of the issues. So a lot of times I think we can end up siloed within, our academic communities, and we're not really getting the word out. And then at the same time, we do have language that we use in our papers and the way we communicate that's not always accessible to the public. They don't always understand. In terms of papers, I know in college I had a hard time getting my hands on a lot of scientific papers and really just being able to get to the information quickly in a way that was digestible. So I really think that art does provide an opportunity for better engagement and understanding, because now people, they do have a lot of visuals. They can ask questions, you can have labels, and they can really have a better understanding of a lot of these complex topics. In addition, the public is really huge in the invasive species problem in terms of buying and spreading invasive species, from nurseries that are still selling exotics. In the metro parks especially, they're, a lot of people's backyards back right up to the edge of the metro parks, and so when people are planting exotic or invasive species, they can just spread right down into the park. I've had family members plant things that they shouldn't, so that's a little bit of a battle, kind of really explaining to people, what the issue is when you're planting non-native species. And then also, a lot of the public's been frustrated that I've talked to. Well, I hear the monarchs are disappearing, but I can't find milkweed anywhere. Where can I buy it? Or, they don't know what's native. Well, shouldn't that be labeled? And so I think if we can really get the public to rally around, talking to these nurseries, making demands that are not just coming, from the scientific community, but that the public wants it, I think, we can have a lot more of an impact there. What's next? So I want to continue to tell the story through art. I'm looking at invasive birds. ODNR was kind enough to give me a permit to collect invasive bird feathers. So I'd actually like to try collaging feathers into invasive birds. Also, I've been hearing a lot about Asian carp that the threat's becoming more imminent. So I really want to start turning my attention toward invasive aquatics, starting to find a way to use zebra mussel shells if possible. So I've been collecting those as well in the art to tell that story. Looking at, there's some really interesting artists that'll actually make jewelry out of beetle elytra in different countries. So, exploring if I can do anything with emerald ash borer in terms of jewelry with elytra there. And then I'm currently working on some paintings called Disaster and Hope. I did find some eco-friendly acrylic paints and be doing some collage work on these paintings with plastic bags and invasive plants, really to show the disaster and hope story with sustainability. So I think in conclusion, we have to be creative, we have to be proactive, and we really have to communicate. We really have to get out there and tell this story and get people engaged around it. So I shared here, this was a wineberry sundae that was at a local ice cream shop, courtesy of Cleveland Metro Parks, but just a really great way to get people engaged. They see on the menu Cleveland Metro Parks, which they really relate to, and then they're asking questions about an invasive plant. And really, can we eat it instead of having to pull it or spray it or burn it or whatever else? Can we find more creative ways to use these plants? I've thrown out there to some people, can we use zebra mussel shells in any kind of construction or walls in the New History Museum, some zebra mussel cement or something? But, they're going to be destructive if we can at least find a productive use for them while trying to eliminate them from our local ecosystems. So that is the conclusion of my presentation, and thank you for your time and listening, and I hope you found it engaging.
Thank you, Emily. I'll have one question just popped up. I'm getting a real echo there. Hopefully everybody else isn't. But have you ever thought about using invasive insect parts such as emerald ash borer, elytra, like you said, for jewelry to incorporate in your two-dimensional art?
Yes, I was thinking about using zebra mussels in terms of emerald ash borer. I think I'd have to probably work with the parks a bit more and see how I can get my hands on them. I know that there's a lot of those purple traps on the trees, the pheromone traps for the emerald ash borer adults. So that is something I'd like to investigate because I think it would be a really intriguing use and really a good way for people to identify, especially knowing the physical size of the insect and kind of what they're looking out for. So yeah, it's just a lot of these, in some cases, with the feathers, it was really interesting. I got in a big conversation with a lot of different people at ODNR that were, going back and forth with the law because you can actually kill invasive birds, you can destroy their nests, but there's nothing around feathers. And so, they were saying instead of kind of going through this whole process with permitting, they ended up writing me a letter of permission just to have some of the feathers of individual species. But I think in some ways they just said, we've never had a request like this before. So, in some cases it's a process being able to use these materials. And like I said, there's a responsibility component, definitely with some of the invasives whose seeds spread very easily. So, yeah, I'm always looking to partner with different organizations that can help get me access to materials and who I can learn from at the same time.
Someone's interested in the idea of it. Do you sell these pieces, or is this something you just do on a project-by-project basis? Do you have a website that shows all your work?
At this time I have, like I said, I do have some originals that I sell, and then I have, so I mentioned the photography that's printed on the archival quality bamboo paper. I do make prints of the invasive species work as well. That's on that paper. I do have some on an online site, but not all of it's up at the moment, but I can provide some contact information or links if there's interest there. I'm still kind of trying to find the audience and where to house it. So, in Texas, in Austin, people have been really receptive to the work at the gallery. But I think on Etsy, it's just kind of a random crowd. Etsy is basically eBay, but just for artists. So pretty much everything on there is handmade or vintage. Um, I haven't quite had people being very receptive or looking for it yet. Probably a lot of people aren't, searching invasive species on an art website necessarily. But.
Well, I'll close by saying, first of all, you have several thank yous, and thank you for your passion in your work. And maybe you should try the Lady Bird Johnson Center, just popped up.
Great.
Try to get involved if you're not in the invasive plant councils around the country. I think they offer a really interesting group that would be really interested in seeing your work, and they have several conferences and workshops, and I think it's a really neat opportunity to go bring this educational tool to a group that would really enjoy it. So,
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. And, well, thank you very much, Emily, for your time today. If anyone else has questions, please feel free to email. I guess Emily put her email up there, and you have my email, and we can get you in touch with her. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.